Welcome to the author show of Entrepreneurship and Regional Development podcast. Each publication in our journal is a great opportunity to share significant and audacious contributions to a large audience. My guest today is Daniel Hjorth from Lund University and Copenhagen Business School. He published recently an article entitled Crafting Social Entrepreneuring Intra-sectional Possibilities in Responding to Gender-Based Violence. He co-authored this paper with Molly Painter. It has been published in Entrepreneurship and Regional Development, a journal edited by Taylor and Francis. Daniel, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Can you tell us what is the origin of your paper and why did you decide to address this particular topic and what was the key question you aim to answer?
Yeah, a good mix of three questions there in the opening. So a big one, but the origin was, as with many papers, I think, a mix of theoretical and empirical curiosities, really. The empirical in this case is a broad and rich background of engagement from Molly Painter's side in particular, in supporting various programs for women fighting gender-based violence in South Africa. Molly is from South Africa originally, and she has then the advantage of being part of the cultural subtext, and this allows her to operate more, I guess, frictionless when it comes to locals and locals' sense-making. Here it was also a question of how technology could help women shield themselves from abusive partners. And that was part of the project, and that Molly was part of supporting from a researcher's side, together with other agencies in South Africa and agencies that work with women in Africa more broadly and also in South Africa. But this idea of helping them against abuse via technology quickly turned to be much more complex and very problematic. So, and part of this is described briefly in the paper also. It turned to more towards community building and attracting women to come together and share and not actually give them mobile phones as a way to reach them, because they also through that got very vulnerable to people who wanted to find them and get to them. So there was a learning process there, of course. So the interest was in this regard to see how a form of social entrepreneurship process could be part of helping them actually, in the end, much more effectively and thoroughly than any technological equipment could do. The center of this was the sewing workshops, where they could combine multiple purposes, learning how to know a craft and in the process being educated about their bodies, how period poverty works, menstruation, when and how one gets pregnant, information that we might take for granted but is not readily available or known widely by everyone in these communities. But also they could handle financial illiteracy or the problems of understanding how to deal with money, which is another source of being dependent on an abusive partner in this case. So learning processes that we generally associate with independence or autonomy or a stronger individual broadly, also in I guess in all parts of the world, when we look at educational systems and what they do in society. This was very central here. But in addition, it released them from a number of dependencies that kept them at home. So young girls and women stayed at home rather than going to school when they had periods of menstruation, because they did not afford sanitary pads, and women also did not go to work all days because of the same reason. So the sewing workshops were about this. They learned how to sew, and they learned how to produce, in effect, sanitary pads that they could use, and thus they freed themselves from a spatial confinement to the home. They went to school, they went to work, and they, in some cases, also started to make this into a bit of a business of their own. So there was this interesting relationship between the community-based social entrepreneurship and that process, the social entrepreneurial process of giving them greater possibilities for living, making them more full citizens. That in some cases also initiated entrepreneurship processes, them starting small businesses of their own. And the research problem here then gradually became, because it's kind of what we would say inductively initiated, but then abductively developed in this tone flow of trying to figure out where the theoretical approach makes sense, how the greatest resonance with the empirical material is to be found. And in our case, it was a lot about framing this as a social entrepreneurial process that in various ways gave women greater agency in battling or dealing with gender-based violence. So that's when, and I'm sure many recognize this as ethnographic researchers, that's when the conversation between the empirical and the theoretical started to happen, and where we found reasons that I might come back to also upgrade the importance of the material in this process, the craft and the sewing as such, as something that is often quite absent from our work. We tend to focus on language, words and discourses and narratives, and not so much bodies and affect and materials.
Can you identify the key contribution of your paper that you believe will have the most impact on the field?
I think it provides a processual and new materialist analysis and theorization of social entrepreneuring. So that's a mouthful. It relates to what I just said about upgrading of the material in ethnographic qualitative research. In this case, it's not only when we engage or activate the process theoretical perspective, but also when we invite new materialist analysis into our work, that the empirical starts to glow and speak to us more strongly. And we have the possibilities of making a contribution where there is very little research, ethnographic research of a processual kind in entrepreneurship studies, in social entrepreneurship. That also gives the material some agency in the process. And I think this in particular also is interesting as the first contribution, because it builds a bit of a bridge between craft research, which is growing globally, and social entrepreneurship, where they are often, I think, in many cases, overlapping. You could also say that if you're a bit bold, that it's in this regard a bit pioneering. It's one of the first, if not the first, processual and new materialist framing of social entrepreneurship studies. And that is also tied to a second contribution, I would say, which brings the intersectionality approach in analyzing this type of problem, where you have social, political, gender, financial problems intersecting, is often studied as such. And here, with the new materialist framing, we turn to what we call an intra-sectionality, meaning that these are relationally inseparable. They do affect each other intensely throughout the process, and affirming that or intensifying this understanding, we thought opened up new ways of making sense of what happened in this case. Yeah.
What was for you the main theoretical or maybe methodological challenge or challenges in addressing such a question?
I think theoretically the challenge was to build the meta-theoretical frame based on process process philosophy and new materialism to a large extent. And those of you who know Molly's in my work know that we are engaged in that kind of interdisciplinarity and try and make use of and challenge and update entrepreneurship and organization theory by the help of philosophy. The challenge is to not have this get in the way of the readers, the entrepreneurship scholars that are readers of journals like Entrepreneurship and Regional Development, of course, cannot sit there and sense that they get philosophy read to them. It has to work. It has to be fitting well with the conceptual work. So the meta-theoretical frame has to be fitting with the theoretical work done in the paper. And here, of course, we have to shout out to excellent reviewers at the journal also that were great in challenging us and also helping us make sense of this work in ways that finds a resonance with the readers. New materialism builds on process philosophy, but also critical feminist theory and vitalist philosophy. So it can easily become a bit of an issue, an item in itself, because it calls on the pedagogical work of trying to present this in a way that makes it useful for the reader, as I mentioned. This philosophy new materialism in particular, challenges quite fundamental binaries between nature and culture, mind and body, and subject and object. So they're not easily described in the sense what happens if we do not subscribe to these binaries anymore. So that has to be done, but contextually so in relationship to this particular study, of course. Methodologically, you can say that we are halfway through the challenge because we haven't completed that work yet field-wise. There are still some developments going on. It's a very long process. But already, of course, any study of gender-based violence is tricky. It's precarious situations for the people involved, and there are actual real threats. And as a researcher, it's not so easy to handle. One has to be aware of when one is a researcher, when one is an analyst, when one is a friend, or when one is a coach, or actually someone that could shield them off from other threats, and of course one also have to understand when you stumble into things you should not be part of, or it's easy to get carried away and suggest or propose things and without thinking of the greater social dynamics of what is going on. When women come together in a community that you have been part of designing, and the dynamics that happens when they start to share stories and lives, and in some cases dreadful stories, and people actually obviously got hurt, and that's I think a challenge that is a bit unusual perhaps for us who study creative processes or startups or innovation here and there. There is drama in these studies too, but often lives are not threatened or people don't get physically harmed in the process, and that was a reality here. Yeah.
Can you share something about the journey? Perhaps a turning point during data collection, a difficult decision you had to make about the research design, or even a moment of doubt?
Yeah, there were several moments of doubt. So that the timing of this, what we do now, is such that Molly could not be part of it, and she could have told you a lot more. But as I mentioned in the opening, one important turning point was that the project first centered on and had funded the possibility of giving women mobile phones, and there was development of an app that they could use to share communication between them and also alert people of if they felt they were in danger and so on. This quickly was used by the abusers, you could say, the predators here who chased the women via their phones. So that had to be abandoned. And of course, a lot of design in the project was around that. So the decision to move to a sewing workshop was key, but also for us studying this, the question was to where to place focus. And here the new materialist framing helped. I'm presently involved in a number of studies where post-humanist and new materialist philosophy and theorization is central. And it's interesting here that this helped us to see that the sewing, the actual making of sanity pads, is the key process going on. As a researcher, you focus on stories and learning and how we educate these people, and that's and of course that was very important too. But the fact that they learned a bit of a craft here, and that they actually, in many ways, could follow the sanity pads out in the world. Concretely speaking, these objects, these in some cases products, because some could start to sell these to women that also did not afford buying these in the supermarket, and so they, in many ways, the physical object here released them from a confinement to the home and to a period poverty based on not knowing and understanding the body, but also not having the resources and equipment to deal with it in the modern world and in a society where you need to be, for example, in school or at work at times and places, and if not, you become an unreliable, unstable source of. That was fascinating to see how this actually was a key, and for us, turning point also analytically in the process. It also then made it very sensible to us to see that a new materialist approach in social entrepreneurship in particular releases a lot of analytical attention and awareness that historically has been quite peripheral when it comes to the importance of matter, objects, the non-human, and how that plays with the human in these processes of learning or becoming entrepreneur in some cases, but also in the pulling together of the community here that really centered around the sewing workshops as the kind of magnet that pulled and held them together to a large extent. Yeah.
If you could go back to the beginning of this project, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently, and what advice would you give to other scholars embarking on similar research?
Well, as I said, the process brought us inductively, you could say, to new materialism and as a meta-theoretical frame. And it could, of course, have been the starting point. That would have saved us rounds of attempts. So this, I think, is the cost, if you like, that you have to learn to live with as a qualitative and field-based researcher. Also, there's a lot of things that you discover in the process, and that's part of the journey. That is a principle for how the analysis is progressed. And afterwards you think, oh yeah, if we would have known this, if we would have focused on the sanity pads and the sewing workshops, that would have saved us at least half year or so in the paper writing that started more broadly and generally with an interest in a processual analysis of social entrepreneurship. It is, of course, in that sense, a bit of a non-problem, because the problem of not finding the right starting point is key to the discovery. But how to bring that into the paper, as many of you know that might listen to this, is always a bit of a challenge to bring a fraction of all the material that you have from your fieldwork into a story or into snippets or quotes or anecdotes that provide for the reader a sense of what what went on in the field and how that can be a source of knowledge creation in conversation with theoretical concepts that you have. Of course, the empirical problem of using technology as a key for helping these women was something that not so much is part of the research process as it was part of the practical way of running the project as such. But of course, that also sidetracked for a long time. There was this other way of, through the new materialist framing, give technology a more central role too. And there are still lots of interesting things one could study there, I think, and in more interesting ways with a new materialist framing. Again, the actual importance of the technology as such, but also how the mobile phone has agency in itself when it comes to making the owner or the user of the mobile phone available, accessible, or knowledgeable in certain ways. But also, as we know, a produced subject, a subject of discourses that travel through mobile phones and apps and digital platforms and make people cluster in ideas, in communities that they might not have chosen and do not quite often know why they are in them, but they become part of group behavior, sometimes group thinking that is not so smart or intelligent or reflected. So there's a lot of interesting things going on there, I think, with the technology too, but we could not pursue that angle here. And I think the experience of the reviewing process has to be mentioned here too, because we found that and many have this experience too, in some processes you struggle with the reviewers. You sense that they do see some, but not all that you're trying to say. And I think in this case that we had a very interesting dialogue with the reviewers via the handling editor, of course, that made us understand what needs to be revealed and what needs to be cut out. And so the normal revising process. And so that's something I now try to bring into these, how to publish workshops that you're part of, as a good example of going through a review process. I think that happens in different ways with different journals and people who submit to multiple journals know this, that you have to have a good sense of aim and scope and all that before you go into it. But so yeah, I think there's a very nice mix here of things that gave us reason to maybe think we could have done things differently, but also that we are grateful for having been through them. And they come both from inductively from the field and from the process of analyzing and writing here. So indeed, I think it was a great learning experience. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, for participating to our show and for pulling back the curtain on your research process, on your article entitled Crafting Social Entrepreneuring, Intra-sectional Possibilities in Responding to Gender-Based Violence, co-authored with Molly Painter. All our podcasts are available on entrepreneurship-ed.com and on the main podcast platforms.